A very good morning to respected dignitaries, members of the Maritime History Society, students of various departments of the University of Mumbai, and all the maritime enthusiasts present here. I am Ms. Manasi Misar Tirodkar, an assistant professor in the Department of Civics and Politics, and I welcome you all to the second session of the day 2 of the academic seminar titled Naval Uprising 1946, Span and Significance, organized by the Maritime History Society in association with the Department of Civics and Politics. The day one of the seminar was an insightful experience for all those who attended it, participated in it, and viewed it on the online streaming. It was filled with various sessions which had set stage for a beautiful experience for all of us to understand the events related to the naval uprising of 1946 and the uprising itself. The second session of the day shall have 4 dynamic scholars who shall be presenting papers highlighting different dimensions of the story of the naval uprising of 1946. All the aspects are extremely important, crucial for being able to understand the significance of the uprising. I welcome our first speaker for the day. Our first speaker for the day is Mr. Sudhir Dongre. Mr. Sudhir Dongre is a research associate in the Department of History of the University of Mumbai. He has previously served as a research associate in the Department of Philosophy of the University of Mumbai. He has his bachelor's degree in art, history, criticism, conservation, and English literature. His master's degree is in the Maritime History of India, Sources in Historical Research. I now request Mr. Sudhir to begin his presentation on titled Historical Context Between Imperial Accounts and Indian Accounts of the Royal Indian Naval Mutiny of 1946. Over to you, Mr. Sudhir.
Thank you. Good morning to all the dignitaries and all the audience. My research paper, based on the theme of maritime history of India, my research topic is historical context between imperial accounts and Indian accounts on RIN mutiny of 1946. For the research study, I use primary and secondary sources as follows. In primary sources, Constitutional relations between Britain and India, Transfer of Power, 1942-47, Volume 2, Volume 6, Volume 7, and Volume 8, published by Her Majesty's Office, London. Mutiny of Innocents by B.C. Datta, RIN Mutinies of 1946 by Vishwanath Bose. In secondary sources, Nehru, a political biography by Michel Brecher, his 1959 edition and 1961 editions, Revolution in India, written by Gunther Francis, Modern India, authored by Sumit Sarkar, History of Naval Dockyard, Bombay, by Sridharan K. India, The Search of Power, written by Maharaj Chopra, From Plassey to Partition and After, by Shekhar Bandyopadhyay, Challenge in Royal Indian Navy, 1946, A Revolution of Its Causes by Tirtha Prakash Jena. These are the sources of my research project. My, my research paper objectives that the paper will understanding the political, social, cultural, and economical settings of the event of the mutiny of 1946. This paper attempts to understand the different perspectives amongst the imperial and Indian accounts. For the research paper, I used following research methodologies. First one is analytical research methodology, and other one is historical research methodology. Two greatest issues was dominated in Indian politics during the peaceful struggle of freedom movement of India in winter of 1945-46, the trial of INA members and the naval mutiny in Bombay. The second one was heralded the decline of British prestige. It was covered by various British account and Indian account. They put forward their different views. Some of them are claimed it was inspired by the Indian national movement, and some of them viewed as the mutiny of 1946 as a legacy of strikes inherited from the American Army and RAF. Arguments of imperial sources. In the letter of Field Marshal Viscount Wavell to Lord Pethick Lawrence, the Viceroy House, New Delhi, on 27 February 1946, Field Marshal Viscount write to the Viceroy House that they had serious disturbed week with RIN mutiny and the serious riots in Bombay. He says in that letter, the cause for the uprising and opinions evolved against us due in large degree of the freedom of speech granted to the political parties, and the press during the elections and propaganda against us was responsible. He considered the mutiny of 1946 was a legacy of upheavals transferred from the hero of worship of those INA officers and American army. He doesn't think repercussions was not triggered by the poor quality of services to the ratings, rather they are inspired by the INA activities and propagandist literature of Indian national movement. The report of Commission of Inquiry into the RIN mutiny been received and was examined by the defense minister. It shows that the men were badly handled by the officers. It focuses on RIN redevelopment. In other words, the Commission of Inquiry does not sink beyond the Naval Central Strike Committee's memorandum relating to untold hardship regarding pay and food and the most atrocious racial discrimination. Richard Woodman, in his brief history of mutiny, says that the mutiny could be manifestation of both a rebellion against a real or imagined injustice and in favor of political change. He gives a statement of Admiral Sardarilal Nanda, who was young officer was present. He quoted afterwards, though the men didn't see it so much as mutiny, but as an expression of feeling against the British. Racist atmosphere was growing in Indian Navy during the war. Nehru, a political biography by Brescher, 1959 editions, writes that the disaffection centered in the military services during 1946. It began with the RAF's which Dum Airport near Calcutta. These were followed by the hunger strikes in RIAF and minor cases of indiscipline in the RIF. The firing exchange between Red and Naval Police was took place at Bombay on 18 February 1946. He says that the city itself presented in the mutiny and the appearance of minor bloodshed. Again, same author, same book, but it is 1961 editions. It has attempted to understand the political response to the mutiny. He says that there were strong political overtones. Congress had shown sympathy towards RIN mutinies, but not openly supported them. Some same stance were taken by the Muslim League. He says that communist evidence in the Sailor Central Strike Committee, thus Congress leader opposed their reliance on the communists and the talk of violence. Now we are going to see the arguments of Indians. Sumit Sarkar in his Modern India put his opinion about the old military traditions of recruitment, which was give space for the racial discriminations, which was one of the causes of mutiny of 1946. Political consciousness came within the Indian military personals of the RIN when they were on services abroad during the war. They got the experiences about the political development in the world and about the INA from the various literature. Sumit Sarkar considered mutiny of 1946 was one of the heroic, if also largely forgotten episodes in Indian freedom struggle. Shekhar Bandyopadhyay explains about the ratings mutiny. He quoted, what was really remarkable was the extent of the fraternizations between the naval ratings and common people that was visible during these few days in various cities of India. A phenomenon that had immense revolutionary potential in the sense they says that through the mutiny, naval personnel came into the flow of national movement of freedom struggle. BC Datta himself has served in RIN. He writes his experiences during the time of mutiny. He explains the thought conditions of ratings of the RIN and how they motivated by the political development in subcontinent and across the world. He says that initially the ratings took on a largely non-violent approach to the mutiny. They even formed a Central Naval Strike Committee in anticipation of negotiations. BC Datta assumed to be supporting role in the committee. BC Datta reflected in his own memories that Indian society has so evolved that there is no room for revolution. Vishwanath Bose also has been served in RIN, claims that the Gandhian theory was a set to national movement of freedom struggle, then in practice. A setback because his non-violence did more harm than good to the people in general and the nation at large. was a time when all neighboring countries believed in the nation at arms. He says that the motivations behind the Navy mutiny was the earlier actions of Indian Navy Army, that is mean Azad Hind Force, was give shock to the very basic root of British administrations in India. Many common features were allowed in both national forces. But in the 3 years gap of the Azad Hind Fauj and RIN, there was different techniques and effectiveness. In the conclusion, I can say the ratings of 1946, in sharp contrast to the men of Azad Hind Fauj, has never been given the status of national hero, though their action was involved with much greater risk in some ways than joining the Iron Age. Genuine grievances were the root of mutinies along with the restlessness common common to all servicemen at the end of a war. The political importance of the events in Bombay cannot be estimated correctly, but it seems that the more and mere coincidence that the announcements of British cabinet mission was made one day after outbreak of the mutiny. The revolt of ratings gave shock to the nationalist movement, which was based on the non-violent movement. It was open struggle against British rule and based on mass appeal. This, however, did not take the men in armed forces into account. Thus, the political parties like Congress and Muslim League expressed sympathy towards ratings, but not given support to their actions. For because both the political
I'm so sorry,
parties know sooner.
Mr. Dongre, Mr. Sudhir Dongre. I'm sorry to interrupt. You'll have to wrap up in about a minute.
Okay, okay. Just give me 1 minute. Just give me 1 minute. They are simple. They are express their sympathy towards ratings, but not given support to their actions. For because both the political parties know sooner or later India will get freedom, and for that they will want army even in free India or Pakistan. After the mutiny, the ratings found themselves in miserable conditions at jobs were plentiful in those days. The bulk of employment in mid 40s was the fund found to either in government office or with foreign funds. Both were close to the ratings. Most of them were forced to return to their village for living miserable life. They had no choice after the independence. After the independence, Sardar Patel offered to the ratings that they can join Navy, but amongst them hardly got opportunity to join Navy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Sudhir Dongre. That was a very wonderful presentation. Let us move on to the second speaker of the day, Mr. Denard D'Souza. I welcome Mr. Denard D'Souza. Mr. Denard D'Souza has a master's in ancient Indian cultural history and archaeology from the St. Xavier's College, Mumbai. His major area of interest is the study of ancient polities of the East and intermingling of culture, religion, and art as a result of trans-regional movement. He also keenly observes current global trends and the application of history to augment policy. He is currently a research associate at the Maritime History Society. I now request Mr. D'Souza to begin his presentation on the topic An Uprising in the Wake of Religiously Subcharged Environment. Over to you, Mr. D'Souza.
Thank you, Manasi. Good morning, everyone. My paper for today is An Uprising in the Wake of a Religiously Surcharged Environment. I will be explaining broad trends of religion vis-a-vis the uprising. The Indian independence movement was hailed to be a phenomenon in the history of global politics where regime change was brought about through noble principles of non-violence. Sadly, this was not the case according to Lord Attlee, the then Prime Minister of the Great Britain, who confided in private with the then acting Governor of India on the reasons for the exit of the British from the Indian subcontinent. He says that among all other reasons, such as mass upsurge, agitation, and food crises, the main reason for the British to opt out of India was the Rhine uprising of 1946. With rebellion within the modalities meant to sustain Pax Britannica in India, it is but a natural corollary that the age of the Raj had to come to an end, even as the sun was setting on the broad horizons of the empire. Around the same time when reverberations of the naval uprising movement were being heard throughout the length and breadth of the country, there was another battle turf in which the natives were themselves engaged in, and this was the battle of their own making. This was the partition of India. The plan for the partition of India was on the table long time before Jinnah thought of capitalizing it after facing an electoral defeat in 1937. Muhammad Iqbal, the sage-like Urdu poet, after his sojourn to the UK and Germany, returned back in 1909 as a narrow-minded religious nationalist espousing the creation of an Islamic nation for the Muslim subjects of the British Crown in India. He was probably the original proponent of the infamous two-nation theory on which Jinnah banked on at a later date. It was under such communally surcharged environment that the naval uprising of 1947 took place. The protagonists of the movement were naval ratings belonging to every major religious community of the Indian subcontinent, with the Hindus and Muslims largely filling the ranks and files of the services. Needless to say, in such a socio-political background, religious identities would have somewhere at the back of their minds, if not at the center of their discourse. Therefore, in this paper, we would like to analyze the dynamics of religion in the naval uprising and the bearing of the contemporary religio-political discourse of pre-independence India vis-a-vis the naval uprising. Religion on plate. Food can be a very touchy issue because of its inherent association with religion. In India, especially when a mutiny had broken out in 1857 on the suspicion of presence of beef and pork in cartridges which had to be ripped off by the sepoys with the aid of their teeth was revolting to both Hindus and Muslims alike. Uh, in his book, Rin Mutiny 1946, Reference Guide and All, Biswanath Bose states that in principle, the rationing system created by the Rin administration, food was to be rationed in three classes, that is ER, that is the English ration, which was meant for predominantly officers and Europeans, and the privileged class of Anglo-Indians among the ratings, who preferred opting this ration. Under the ER group, they were given everything offered to other groups with additional quantity of beef, bacon, pork or mutton, cheese, custard, butter, condensed milk, fruits, cigarettes, tinned fish, and also tinned fruits, porridge, biscuits, cakes with large sizes of loaves and best quality of rice, plus tea, coffee, drinks, cold drinks, etc. The IR or the Indian ration, which it is called as, was meant for majority of the Indian ratings, which comprised of Hindus and Mohammedans. This ration included ordinary rice or bread, chapati with mutton, sometimes beef also, pulses, sliced loaf with butter or jam or jelly, tea, biscuits, etc. The quality being substandard or bad and not edible. And then there was the vegetarian ration, which was preferably for the ratings who were of Orthodox caste, Hindus, or whoever liked vegetarian food, which included ordinary coarse rice or bread, chapati with pulses, vegetable curry, sliced loaf with butter or jam or jelly, plus additional loaf. However, on ground, the rationing system was somewhat of a flop. B.C. Dutt, who was a telegraphist of the Royal Indian Navy and one of the leading protagonists during the uprising, notes that the vegetarian food was not served in any form during his period of service. These conditions could have been distressing to those ratings who were vegetarian for religious reasons. Slogans for unity. Another poignant reminder that there was a religious subtext playing in the background, albeit a very subtle one, was the kind of slogans that were employed at or during the uprising. Slogans like Hindu Muslim Ek Ho, Hindu Muslim Unity Zindabad were part of the sloganeering lexicon of the ratings. One would ask, why were such slogans employed in the first place? We may assume that the leaders of the movement were apprehensive of the contemporary politics of the religion creeping into the ranks and file of the ratings who were by and large belonging to these communities. Such slogans were perhaps employed to downplay the religious rough edges and to motivate the ratings to synergetically rally around the cause that stirred the uprising. Communal harmony at work. All things in the uprising were not as gory. Religious harmony was also at play and very palpable on the streets of Bombay. When the ratings fed up of their living conditions and the boorish demeanor of the British officers, they started storming out of the shore establishments. The locals and the shopkeepers belonging to Hindu, Muslim, Parsi, and Iranian communities of Bombay made common causes with them and threw their shops open. This was a heartwarming gesture, to say the least. It conveyed a message of religious harmony amongst different religious communities, sympathizing with the larger cause, that is, liberation of the nation from foreign dominance. This communal harmony was also at display during the most solemnest of events of human existence, that is, death. Biswanath Bose, who was witness to the uprising, speaks of how, during one instance when he was asked to perform the last rites of the Hindu ratings, which he volunteered to, he was at this point joined by other ratings belonging to the Sikh, Christian, and Muslim communities too. The volunteers were ferried out in the jeeps to the funeral grounds in the outskirts of the city. The funerary cavalcade was showered with petals by thousands of women from Karachi on its way to the destined location. The bodies of the Sikh and Hindu martyrs were cremated on the same ground but at distance apart. Bose says he was grief-stricken, and at such a moment, Harjinder, the rating who volunteered to be a pallbearer for the Sikh martyrs, pulled him near and consoled him in a tight embrace. This anecdote of communal fraternity speaks a thousand words on how the ratings, despite their various backgrounds, stood with each other in hard times. In conclusion, I would state, while religion was the center of pre-independence civilian political discourse, it had its reverberations in the rank and files of the naval establishment. However, it did not quite play the destructive role in the Navy like it did in the civilian politics of that era. Rather, it gathered momentum for the ongoing freedom struggle. Most importantly, religion and was an all-pervasive force that was also ubiquitous in the uprising of 1946. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Denard. That was really thought, uh, thoughtful and very, very interesting. Many things which I had absolutely no idea about. Thank you so much for enlightening me with the presentation. We shall now move on to the third speaker for the session, Ms. Zoshika Mal. I welcome Ms. Zoshika Mal on the panel. Ms. Zoshika is a student of Masters in Applied Mathematics at the Amity University. She's also pursuing her postgraduate diploma in Security Studies from the Department of Civics and Politics, University of Mumbai. I now request Joshika to begin her presentation on the topic Influence of INA and Netaji on the RIN mutiny. Over to you, Joshika.
Thank you, ma'am, and good morning, everyone. My presentation would explore how the mutiny of the Royal Indian Navy was influenced by the activities of the Indian National Army and the ideologies of Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. For many years, this event had been thrown into oblivion from the mainstream discourse on freedom struggle. But it was significant in setting up the final stage, which caused the empire on which the sun never sets to witness their sunset from our land. So, in the very beginning, we would just go about certain facts about the RIN and the events that followed. The Royal Indian Navy was originally incepted as East India Company's Marine in 1612, and it was finally rechristened as the Royal Indian Navy in 1934. We move on to the next slide, where we can see that there was a special class of officers, the non-commissioned officers and the Indian sailors. They were called naval ratings, and they had certain grievances given the despicable work conditions and the treatment meted out to them by the higher authorities. Although they had revolted earlier also, but they were looking out for that opportune movement where they could collectively voice out their grievances against their employers. Okay, so now quickly going on through the events in the next slide. At that point in 1940, at that point of time in 1945, the INA trials had enraged the general public, and that had also influenced the naval ratings, and we would see how. So on 1st December 1945, Balai Chand Dutt had painted "Quit India" and "Inqilab Zindabad" on the walls of HIMS Talwar. In January 1946, 50 out of 67 ratings at Castle Barak had refused to consume the unpalatable food which was served to them. Then finally, in February 1946, it is 1946, a naval central strike committee was formed, which was headed by Lieutenant MS Khan as the president and telegraphist Madan Singh as the vice president. Around 20,000 sailors, 78 ships of Royal Indian Navy, and 20 shore establishments had taken part in the mutiny. The general people of Bombay also came out to the streets for the strikes and protests, student unions, labor unions, and so on. Ratings from Karachi, Kolkata, Madras, Cochin, Jamnagar, Vishakhapatnam, and other naval establishment stations also revolted in equal fervor and spark. But to understand how the ideologies of a person or the activities of a group can influence an event, we need to holistically analyze the dimensions of the same. So we move on to the next slide, where we would analyze the different spheres of the Royal Indian Naval Mutiny. The first being the social sphere. Rabindranath Tagore had said, as you can see on the screen, the worst form of bondage is the bondage of dejection, which keeps men hopelessly chained in loss of faith in themselves. Britishers were suffering from they were suffering from a superior race syndrome, and they believed that we, the Indians, were white men's burden, and they were actually doing something benedictory by civilizing us. So this common thread of social indignity which they had thrown up upon us united freedom fighters pan India. There was also example of young Subhash who was rusticated from his college for allegedly agitating against his professor who made vilifying remarks on Indians. Oodles of such examples are available in the lives of revolutionaries, and these examples are mutually inspirational when they are standing for a common cause of freedom. The second angle which we would explore is the economic angle. As we know, the sailors of the Indian and the British sailors of the same rank were having a major pay gap of about 10 times. They were served unpalatable food, and they were allotted dilapidated accommodation. In a scenario as such, they were having many grievances against their employers. But I would like to clarify something over here. It is many of us believe that this was the primary reason and the sole reason why the naval ratings were revolting. But was it so? Balai Chandra Dutt writes in his book Mutiny of the Innocents that when the Indian soldiers who were employed by the British, they were sent by the British to shoot at the naval ratings. Then the naval ratings had told them, we would see in the next picture, that brothers, we are not fighting to fill our stomachs with better food and for a softer life. See the highlighted text. We are fighting for the country's freedom. This is in the words of B.C. Dutta. So it is clear that their intentions were not as petty as improving solely their job conditions, but it was as pious as contributing to the ongoing freedom struggle and to break the yokes of the British Raj from the destiny of all their compatriots and the country people. One more supportive argument in our favor would be the fact that one of the major demands of the mutineers was the release of the soldiers persecuted under the INA trials and the ultimate adjournment of the trials. But was this demand related to the bonhomie between the forces? Were they actually service mates? Technically speaking, no, because the INA were recruited or were brought together by Netaji and his predecessors like Mohan Singh. But the naval ratings were actually employed by the Britishers. It was actually the feeling of belongingness to the same nation that had caused these sailors to demand for the release of their brothers. The third angle which we would explore is the geopolitical angle. The global happenings also indicated the fall of United Kingdom and the emergence of superpowers like US and USSR. Geographically speaking, the peninsular topography of the Deccan India enabled the ratings to encircle the Indian coast and intimidate the British. Politically, the movement of Indian independence was at its peak, with the political leadership demanding Purna Swaraj instead of the dominion status, and also principles of non-violence and revolutionary ideologies both were working in sync to work towards the liberation of the country. And the last dimension which I would like to explore, and which I consider to be the most important, considering the influence of the INA and Netaji, is the psychological dimension. The sailors of RIN were so charged that they had started calling them Azad Hindis after Azad Hind Fauji's or the INA soldiers. by the daunting task of which Netaji had undertaken and the courageous activities of INA. Also, they drove on vehicles in Mumbai carrying pictures of Netaji and shouting Jai Hind and release INA soldiers. They adopted Jai Hind as their war cry throughout the revolt, and it is believed that Jai Hind was adopted by Netaji and INA first. To keep the flame of nationalism burning in the heart of the sailors, literature of the INA was passed among them, and letters from INA men in Southeast Asia was secretly circulated. And one of the telegraphists of the RIN, R.K. Singh, was heavily inspired by Netaji. Also, sailors in HMIS Talwar were staunch followers of Netaji. It is also believed that a fund called INA Relief Fund was set up too. There are striking similarities in the modus operandi of both INA and the naval mutiny. In the context of discipline, the well-organized manner of the revolts, and the systematic way in which the information was communicated through all the levels. The tales of bravery of INA and the naval mutiny are often less accredited, but were the major push to the British inertia, causing their retreat from the mainland of India within a year. As you also know, as we know the remark of Attlee when he came back to India. Now, why was this revolt so special? Because any empire or anyone, one can either rule a land either by the people's will or by coercion. While the former can never be the chance, was never the reason for why the British Raj was ruled. The British Raj, by Indians were being ruled by the British. There was no people's will. It was the forces which were making it possible for the Britishers to rule the country. But the forces were the main reason.
Joshika, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry to interrupt. You'll have to wrap up in 2 minutes.
Yes, ma'am, I'm
Go
wrapping
ahead.
it up. Yes, I'm just making the concluding remarks. The latter were the forces, the army personnel was still loyal to the Britishers, and this was the primary reason why the Union Jack could not be uprooted from the Indian soil. But mutinies as such made the writings of the exit of the British from the walls of Indian history prominent and inevitable. I would like to conclude with a statement in the next slide that discipline begets the quest for justice. In the next slide, we would see that the discipline in all the wings of the armed forces sensitizes them towards the cause of political, social, and economic justice and equality. The RIN, the naval ratings and the sailors, underwent through a crisis of conscience. Superficially, discipline was, and their duty was demanding them to remain obedient to their employers, but fundamentally, the very core patriotic spirit of the forces was pulling them back to the call of the nation. And all they needed was a validating support, which was already fulfilled by the leadership of the great Netaji. His speeches were fiery enough to arouse the dead from the pyres of bondage and fight for true liberation. A perfect example of a military leader, the manifestations of his ideologies were the activities of the Indian National Army. To conclude in a sentence, the ideologies of Netaji and the activities of INA successfully fanned the flame of nationalism among these naval sailors who then took up the cause to liberate their motherland. Before I close, I would also like to thank my guide, Mansi ma'am, for helping me throughout the project. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Joshika. It was really a well-read, well-researched presentation. Let's move on to the final speaker of the session, Ms. Amruta Talwadekar. Ms. Amruta Talwadekar is a research associate at the Maritime History Society. She is an architect by profession and holds a postgraduate degree in architectural and urban conservation from Kamla Raheja Vidyanishi Institute of Architecture and Environmental Studies. Her areas of research are documentation and conservation of built heritage, Bombay and its evolution, and shipbuilding heritage of India. That's very interesting. I now request Ms. Amruta to begin her presentation titled An Insight into Living Conditions of the Ratings of RIN Mutiny. Over to you, Amruta.
Thank you, ma'am. Good morning to all present with us today. Although having lived in Mumbai for the past several years, I was surprised to know about the mutiny that began in Mumbai back in 1946 after I joined MHS. While we have with us many eminent speakers who have mastered different aspects of the subject, today I would like to concentrate on the living conditions of these ratings that participated in the Arayan Mutiny in terms of both infrastructure as well as the facilities provided. Indians played a crucial role in the World War II preparations back in the time when the Indian Defence Forces were under the British rule and the Indian Navy was called the Royal Indian Navy. As part of the World War II preparations, many were inducted into the Royal Indian Navy on the lines of the newly shaped Royal Navy. They aspired to follow the same set of guidelines that were followed back in Britain by the Royal Navy. Little did they know that it was a failed attempt. Indian staff's term of service, whether related to pay or allowance, food, the ration supplies, the rail travel, the lodging, leaves, medical, as well as other administrative day-to-day duties on board ships as well as on establishments were different. The Royal Indian Navy was left with mismatched troops, souring officer and civilian relationships, and the outbreak of the Royal Indian Naval Mutiny. By the end of January 1946, the global war had significantly come to an end. Peace treaties were signed with various fighting nations. As the war ended, post-war planning, demobilization, and resettlement were the immediate reflexes of the authorities. As a result, the defense budget was curtailed. Even after serving honestly towards the Royal Indian Navy's vision, the sailors were being subject to unemployment. There was a sense of uncertainty among the ratings. While the causes of the mutiny ranged from deprivation of positions to the apathetic treatment of the British to Indian ratings in the outbreak of the mutiny, the living condition of these ratings played a crucial role. One of the primary living conditions that bothered the ratings was food. Food and nutrition, as mentioned, are fundamental to military capability. Food was the essential requirement to maintain good order and discipline within the forces. The food served to these Indian ratings was unhealthy and unappetizing. The British authorities failed to realize the consequences of inadequate nutrition that would result in poor physical as well as cognitive performance of these ratings. The main food supplies in the defense forces included rice, atta, pulses, meat, vegetables, and condiments. Till 1941, the Royal Indian Navy would subdelegate contractors that were reliable and affordable for food supplies. As the war days came closer, the number of recruits deliberately increased. Providing for the massive increase in recruits proved tedious, and the supplies on ships became erratic. There was a noticeable difference in the quality of supplies. Even after the establishment of the Royal Indian Naval Service Corps in 1943, there was no significant change in the quality. The hands soon changed to the food department of the government, who was now to undertake a quality check. The authorities were quite tolerant towards impurities in the food. At the mess, there was very little difference between standard, that is non-vegetarian, and vegetarian ration, except for milk in place of mutton. Vegetables and pulses were cooked together in a common kitchen and served separately. The breakfast was always bread and dal, which lacked variety. For lunch, the same dal was mixed with water and rice to form a patli dal, or a diluted version of dal. The curry, the e-ration, consisted of beef curry and bread for dinner. The I-ration followed the same pattern, substituting beef and bread with mutton and chapati. There was also a vegetable ration or a vegetarian ration for the Orthodox caste Hindus. In spite of this, the quality of the food was inferior. The curry was a blend of stewed flavors that no Indian had ever tasted. The taste remained the same. They called it a witch's brew. On board, there was no vegetarian diet. As no attempts were made to change the situation, unhealthy food caused a nauseous feeling of disgust and self-pity among the ratings. Many a times they were forced to sustain on dry ration like biscuits. Although there were several outbreaks during the war, the limitations of the war prevented the eruption of the volcano. The ratings somewhere felt that the food conditions would apparently improve post war. The lack of improvement post war, the lack of improvement even after the war, further led to discontent. Food thus became the binding agent for the ratings. Poor food conditions on ships as well as establishments was conducive to the bad administration and behavior of the higher authorities within the Royal Indian Navy, which became a major concern that contributed to the rising dissatisfaction. Accommodation and facilities provided to these ratings during and post war were poor as compared to the lavish facilities provided to the English counterparts. Post training, many recruits were kept at army barracks for lodging. While HMIS Talwar in Bombay was equipped for training nearly 600 ratings at a time, post war the base was overcrowded and lacked discipline. There was no training program to keep the ratings occupied. The establishments were far less clean. Every week, new batches would pour in to await demobilization or new posting. Messes became a center for sharing experiences and accounts of war and discontentment. Accommodations for Indians were thrice as crowded as the ones occupied by white personnel. Indian ratings were crammed together with very little space for movement. White soldiers, on the other hand, were given individual bunks. During the wartime, transportation and tents were provided for the British but none for Indians. Apart from this, the uniform provided to the ratings were insufficient, thus forcing them to wash and wear the same uniform again and again to match the pace of tidiness and discipline of their rank in the Royal Indian Navy. Salary increment was not initiated as expected. Post war, free time and the lack of organized training for these ratings initiated discussions among themselves on matters relating to unhappiness in terms of behavior of the higher authorities and the unworkable conditions that they faced. This, along with other factors such as discrimination and behavior of the authorities, further led to anti colonial feelings among the men. On the evening of 17 February 1946, two sailors refused to take their meals. Complaints were neglected, and the result was the outbreak of a hunger strike followed by an open mutiny on HMIS Talwar. On 19 February, the ratings issued a charter of demands that demanded best class Indian food and provision of equal facilities to both British and Indian personnel. In the end of World War II found these ratings without guidance. Lack of provision of food and basic amenities, even after representing the British Crown in the World Wars, led to resentment among the sailors. This further accelerated as a cause of unfriendly and abusive behavior of the European authorities. Thus, the Royal Indian Naval Mutiny of 1946 started with the hunger strike by the ratings of HMIS Talwar and the Royal Indian Navy Signal School. The ratings refused to touch the food given to them. Subsequently, 78 ships, 20 shore establishments, and 20,000 sailors took part in the uprising. The struggle was supported by the public, mainly the industrial workers of Mumbai. More than 250 mutineers lost their lives. While a mutiny in the armed forces should not be glorified, the demand for basic facilities and infrastructure by the sailors emerged in the form of an erupting volcano that triggered India's freedom. Although the method of putting up their demands may have been incorrect, it is impossible to undermine the denial of palatable food and essential amenities to these naval ratings. Thank you.
Adarsh, do we still have Professor Mansi? Yeah,
I'm so sorry, sir. I had
over
lost the
to you.
connection because of
No,
some technical problem. I'm
no,
extremely
that's
sorry.
okay. That's it. No, no, go ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. And I apologize for the technical problem. Uh, I'm so sorry I could not hear the concluding part, but I really loved Amrita's presentation. It was really, really very interesting. I now request all the panelists to be put up on the screen so that we can have a discussion. I have some questions for all of them, and believe me, it was really interesting. I felt like a first-year student sitting in a history class and learning from professors. It was amazing. I had absolutely no clue about many of these factors which all of you have mentioned in your presentation. So we have Mr. Sudhir, we have Joshika, we have Amruta, and Mr. Denard on screen. I would like to start with Sudhir since he gave the first presentation. Mr. Sudhir, am I audible to you?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. I really like the way you brought about the comparison. I just wanted to, I wish that you comment on the impact of political movement on the mutiny. We spoke about how mutiny had an impact on the nationalist movement, but how the political movement that was going on at that point of time, nationalist movement, how did that have an impact on the mutiny? Can you reflect on that?
Hello. Can you repeat your
Yes, yes.
question? I didn't hear.
Okay. I will repeat the question. I was wondering how did the political movement or the nationalist movement, which was active at that point of time, how did that have an impact on the mutiny? What I gathered from your presentation is how the mutiny ultimately had an impact on the nationalist movement. I wanted to see if anything happened the other way around.
There was a time that was happening of transfer of power. So all the political parties didn't want it became on the way of violent way. So they didn't want to. That's why they condemned the mutiny of 1946. Uh, they got to know within the 2 to 3 years, India will become a free nation. So they want even in free nation they want the army. That's why they opposed to the mutiny.
Okay. So they
Uh,
actually wanted to ensure that the armed forces stay the way they are post independence. That is what you're trying
yes,
to
yes,
reflect.
yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Sudhir. I would want to go to the second speaker, Mr. Denard. Again, many things were absolutely new for me, and I, in fact, liked the topic that you chose. Um, Speaking about religious harmony in a mutiny, in an atmosphere where, well, the partition was active, and elsewhere also, I think that somewhere that communal element had entered, which remained in the country for a long time. I wanted to know what kept this religious harmony as far as the Rin mutiny is concerned in an atmosphere where, in a communally charged atmosphere. What do you think kept them different as compared to the rest of the country? Over to you, Denard.
Well, my personal observation, by and large, when I was reading B.C. Dutt's work, and then I was reading Biswanath Bose's work. One thing that I realized was that the amount of regimentation that the armed forces, deployed on these ratings. So probably there was a sense of, that their ideas of who they were, what they are, their backgrounds, these were kind of subtly downplayed, made them, over a period of time, they probably downplayed it. They subtly uh, those frictions which exist within societies were downplayed in the naval establishment, and that was the reason why that they found that this was not a very necessary a very necessary tool, right, to bring up during an uprising, or because even their needs, if you see, are very economic in nature. They did not actually, look at things from purely a religious perspective. Their food,
I absolutely understand that, Danad. I was just wondering that ultimately they came from families, right? And their
yes,
families may have been influenced by whatever was happening in the
yeah,
country, but despite that, managed to stay away from this communal problem. I'm wondering
that
why.
is that is because of the regimentation. I think, when you are into an in a naval setup, or for that matter in any in any force, there's a certain element of, regimentation that is brought about. You're expected not to follow the trends that are generally in a civilian atmosphere would be normal. It's always preferred that you present yourself for a larger cause. And I think that was, over a period of time, those rough edges were kind of, the communal rough edges were kind of withered away, I would rather say, to create a more congealed identity, that of the sailors, rather than I am a Hindu, or I'm a Muslim, but those identities did remain. They were not as strongly played as in the civilian politic in that sense, as it was in
That's
the real
wonderful.
politics.
And that's an important point to be made. I mean, I'm not saying that that does not happen elsewhere in the world, but in a country like India with that kind of diversity, I think this is especially something that especially should be mentioned. Moving on to Joshika, I have, I saw the presentation that you made, the PowerPoint. I like that. I saw how you brought about similarities between, in fact, the concluding part of it, when you brought about similarities between INA and the Royal Indian Navy. Can you maybe highlight some differences between the two? Were there any differences in the functioning, not problems?
Differences in the functioning, as in the modus operandi. You're trying to
Yeah,
say
yeah,
that, ma'am?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Ma'am, the modus operandi of INA was also
Hmm.
the similarities, as I have said. I would say the difference was the naval ratings were they were they had a more non-violent approach in the beginning. Later, when they were suppressed by the Britishers, then they maybe took up to also agitating and all. But the INA from beginning was a military
Mhm.
establishment, as we know, was the army. So it was working with that revolutionary
Mm.
ideology right from the very beginning. Otherwise, the work in which how they encircled the RIN, the Navy, the ratings encircled India from the Indian coast from all the naval establishments. The INA did the same thing when
Mhm.
they were entering India from Southeast Asia and all. So those were the similarities. The only way I would say is the methodology. The RIN mutiny was initially a non-violent one, which went on to the agitation, but the INA was definitely a military establishment by Mohan Singh, Netaji, who had then taken up the cause, revolutionary, following the path of revolution.
So should we be considering the point on of political obedience or obedience towards the seniors within the services, because they were ultimately working with the Royal Indian Navy, right? So that kind of obedience relation may have
Yes.
remained, but when they decided to go for the uprising, they ended up becoming. Thank you so much, Joshika, and of course yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
So
I would
our last speaker, who I could not hear for the last minute or so, I want to start by saying that when you began the presentation and you said that till you started working for MHS, you were not aware of something like this actually happened. I would want to add that the same thing happened with me, Amrita. Despite teaching political science for, I don't know, almost a decade. And that is precisely something that I want to ask you before I move on to your actual presentation. What do you think is the reason for this ignorance among the laymen? Not talking about people who specialize, but somebody who's doing maybe engineering in robotics. Why should he know and why doesn't he know? So that is my question to you.
Yeah, so I think firstly, because I come from a very different background, not which is not history as such, so it's more of architecture. I think first thing, it's not there in the syllabus, so there's nothing that we.
Hmm.
So if you have like engineering or architecture for that matter, people think it's not related. But once I started, I think when I joined my masters and I was studying about Bombay, there's a lot of things that influence Bombay. So all these events that are taking place, every person as a Mumbaiker, if I say, or as a citizen should know and should be aware. So once I came to MHS, there was a lot of things that I found out after I joined MHS. So it was very interesting, and I think everybody should know about it, which is why the seminar is, I think, really useful for people like me.
Thank you so much for making that point that this is something which should be known. And then coming to your presentation, the part that I was able to actually listen, you spoke about how they were tolerant for a long time, and then despite all that, the kind of treatment that was given to them, be it food, be it the facilities, the infrastructure. Do you think that this tolerance was something which, in fact, led to further discrimination? Should they have actually reacted prior to the time that they did? Should they have actually reacted much before? This is something that I want to know from you.
Probably they could have, but there is always this thing that you are in a defense service and you're working for the nation. Until they were in at war, it was for India, for the British India that was there. But once they came back and they realized that they are still being treated up, in spite of being there for the nation and for the British crown, in spite of working so hard, there was nothing that they were receiving, and they were subject to unemployment. They were not being treated. They obviously at war they were at par with the Britishers, and they were working with the European personals at the same level, be it sailors, be it Indian other officers. And in spite of all of this, they were still being faced with unemployment and the other facilities that were there. So obviously that was a trigger, but I think they had started revolt. Those small outbursts were there, which were neglected by the authorities. So this just accelerated, and as I said, it just piled
So,
up.
like Denard mentioned, or even like Mr. Sudhir mentioned, this was something that was accumulating for a long time, and then it rightfully came out. Some people say that the timing, if it was not 1946, say if it was 1920 or 1925, probably they would have got larger political support than they actually got. Maybe that the fact that it came on the verge of independence, created a different story, or the story went on a completely different lines. Thank you so much. It was interesting. All of you, inputs of all of you are really interesting. And now we have the director of MHS, Commodore Dr. Oracle Johnson, with us. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Professor Mansi. The reason I joined is yesterday I couldn't do for the thematic session. I want to begin by complimenting yesterday's team. I'm talking the non-MHS team, Vishal and Mangesh. Today, Sudhir and Josika. My personal encouragement as a research supervisor is to see the interest taken in a very important element. I will engage in a bit of a discussion, but before I come to my point, I'm very happy for Dr. Ravinder Chima from Khalsa College to, bringing up the comment. But she also has a question which I wonder if someone would be able to answer or want to answer. How did the administration respond to the students' peaceful strike? Maybe Sudhir or Leonard, someone who's been reading on the political component, you are aware that along with the mill workers, the students also had a strike around the time. Do either of you want to just comment on this?
Well, I could comment a bit.
Yeah.
Yes. I think the students were just like how they are today, very revolution minded people. So when they looked at it from their perspective, they were like all warm inside and, warm blood. They when they joined these protests against it, it was definitely against the imperial mainstay that was at that period of time, the British. They looked at it from a more socio-political standpoint, where they reacted to it from purely those perspectives, not from any religious or politically partisan perspective. And I think that was one striking element of that uprising when the students joined into that. It was devoid of every other extraneous elements which were not connected to the socio-economic um, structure, economic paradigm of the uprising. So that was one thing, and there was a little bit of the independence kind of surge within, like, the nation has to be free, but it was not necessarily the nation, but the nation has to be free uh, from the imperial grasp. That's what I saw while I was reading through the textual accounts. That's my take
Uh,
as well.
Yeah, thanks, Leonard. And that's I'm going to lead to a question which is there in the comments. But to both Sudhir and Josika, in addition to commending your effort, I was telling my team here when Sudhir started his talk and he did this amazing acknowledgement of what academic presentation, quoting sources, quoting methodology. And I was saying this is a discipline of research which cannot be ever missed out. But can I say both while hearing other views in addition to your research? Sudhir, you have come from both philosophy and politics. You have covered something. Josika covers maths, a bit of mathematics background, and now civics and politics. Listening to others, is there a different takeaway that you have today after having heard the deliberations, which modifies some bit of your assessment? Can I begin with Josika and then come to Sudhir?
So first of all, I would like to thank the MHS team and the Department of Civics and Politics for giving me this platform to speak on. The takeaways from both the sessions of yesterday and today's, the thematic sessions, as well as the other discussions, would be more awareness about the naval uprising. While I was researching, I had to search. The materials were not easily available because as ma'am also rightly mentioned, that this awareness is not there in the general public about the naval uprising. The takeaways would be, I think, the food and nutrition part, which was presented today before me, and the religious angle, definitely. From the yesterday's paper, geopolitical angle was there, and the different various aspects from where I could have seen the uprising. That it was a first an all violent uprising, then moved on to the agitation. This was something which I would like to take away from this uh, two sessions of today and yesterday's.
Yeah, thanks. You are just highlighting back to the need for a new review of literature, which we are talking. Yesterday, I was having a conversation with Dr.
Yes,
Uttara late
yes.
in the evening, and we will talk about that. Sudhir, what is your, in addition to your research, what is from listening to others, what do you modify or a new learning, what you would say as a benefit?
Maybe, thank you so much, sir, for giving me opportunity to present my thoughts here. Uh, there is lot of things I learned from yesterday's sessions and today's sessions. Sir, while you wrap up the first session and you giving the address on some literature, I got goosebumps because my sources you were adding in your sessions. So I thought you disclosed my research paper.
Okay, great. So,
Uh,
Sudhir, have you finished or just your audio went?
yeah, I and thank you.
Yeah, okay. So just not to leave out Amrita. In fact, before I come to Amrita, and I'll finally give it back to Mansi, and she has a task in after a little break to do the whole wrap up. So I've been listening, and I thought I will get views beginning with Amrita. A lot of comments have come on the political environment. For example, Commander Kumresh says, yes, it would have got better political support had it coincided with the Quit India movement. Someone talked about had it happened. My father came around the time Khilafat movement had just got over. These are what we call the counterfactuals or our assessment, what if examination of events. But I have this as someone who has heard the story from childhood to now in heading the research. There are many more facets which are still to be discovered. And I think a political environment impact is something that definitely requires a deeper probing. I think we may not have all the answers. The narrative is the political people were indifferent. The narrative is Aruna Asaf Ali is supportive. The narrative is on 17th there was a meeting. These are what we know. And then as new things discover, we may have to sometimes revise our narratives. For example, what Amrita picked up about, conditions. Just for information, in Timeless Way, Colonel Nazmul Haq was doing a study just before the uprising, and he said these are the things that need to be taken care of. Somebody talked of military hierarchy. In a military role, hierarchy is inevitable because in action you cannot sit and do discussion, you'll have to follow. But that same person also comes from the same country, he comes from the environment. When Dinner talks of religious harmony, it's not that they felt any less strong about their own religion, they put it aside for the cause at hand when they were fighting a battle. So in these readings, Amrita, from a built heritage and from studying about a lot of the 19th and 20th century heritage components, uh, what would you want to examine further? Because now we are saying, how do we take this research further? What would you examine further in this component? Because just to tell you, one of my ancient history scholars in the MHS now wants to study modern. That's the what the seminar seems to have done. But let me come to Amrita. What is it that you would like to probe if you have an opportunity?
So I think I would. So what I personally feel is that people have a lot of impact through architecture. So I would like to study it from how, like I know about the conditions of the barracks and where they live. I would like to study more on the infrastructure that is provided to them, how it had a maybe psychological impact on these ratings that triggered the uprising. Maybe that would be an interesting topic.
Thanks. So just to say, so for each one of even yesterday's thematic session and today's thematic session, there is so much more. And we will be following up with the department and with the university a short and a medium term method to relook at the literature. And we would be very happy for scholars to come and examine not just my view or some people's view, but your view as an independent researcher. People may not agree with it, but if we follow a good research methodology, we will get new perspectives. And every story must be examined from all frames, all perspectives. Then you have the choice. So that is there. And I think, as someone who's actively into the business of research, Mansi, I think that's a good point to give this back to you. Your takeaway. Then we will have, after you finish, we'll have a 5-minute pause. And by about 12:10, we will kind of, connect. We can't end the broadcast because this is the same link. So thank each one of you. I just came in. I was so fascinated. I wish I was free enough to do a paper. I have still not written about it. So I still am reading. I'm enjoying. So I wish I had the energy of doing a paper like the young scholars have done. Commendable work. So back to you, Mansi.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. I would like to say that it has been actually a learning experience for me. As I mentioned, it is as if I have gone back to my first year history class and learned since yesterday. It's been such an enlightening seminar. I would like to speak about certain takeaways which I want to in fact highlight. The first thematic session that happened yesterday after the inaugural one, I was keenly listening to each and every paper presenter, and I actually learned a lot. So many discussions about the changes that took place during the around the naval dockyard prior to the uprising. What led to the uprising? There was a discussion on the nature of national and international media and how that media coverage of the uprising, which is a very, very important factor to understand the story, as sir mentioned. How the media shaped the public opinion, and that is extremely important, because what were the people, okay, now because of the history, the kind of content that is included in the history textbooks or otherwise we are not, but at that point of time, how were the people actually feeling feeling about it, and how was the media shaping that particular opinion. I learned a lot from the presentations yesterday, and ultimately there was an insight on how the uprising contributed to putting an end to the British supremacy in India. Followed by that was a special session which I enjoyed the most, and that was a session which involved discussion between Commodore Dr. Oracle Johnson sir and Dr. Siba. It was a very interesting discussion about a book called Timeless Timeless Way. They observed how in the literary testimonies of history, of uprising, literature, and history, they interacted about various literary and archival material available on the subject. And while citing a chapter unwrapping an uprising from the book Timeless Way, Commodore Johnson talked about his memory of the uprising, which was transmitted to him by his father, who had served in the Royal Indian Navy. And that was really, as Sudhir mentioned in his talk, it actually gave goosebumps to all of us. It was really worth listening to, something that really had an impact on our minds. Today's session, which actually began, was also a special session, which was a discussion between Commodore. It was chaired by Commodore Shrikant Kesnur, Director of Maritime Warfare Center, and eminent scholars, Professor Aniruddha Deshpande and Shri Pramod Kapoor. It was really interesting to listen to the things that they spoke about, the wealth of archival material available on naval uprising. They spoke about the importance of the subaltern school of historiography in the study of the uprising. And there was a consensus that this is a situation of the archives needs to be upgraded. Whatever this is the situation, it needs to be upgraded, and there's a need for greater funds for supporting the archival maintenance. Very interesting. And the session which I in fact moderated, and again from which I learned a lot, also gave me a lot of takeaways. We spoke about, again, as Mr. Sudhir mentioned, the political impact and impact of the mutiny in politics. There was a discussion on unified secular front, which the ratings projected in a communally subcharged environment, and which is again a very important aspect in the context of the partition of India. We also explored how the Royal Indian Navy was influenced by the activities of INA and the ideologies of Subhash Chandra Bose. And finally, we tried to understand the living conditions of the ratings in terms of infrastructure and facilities, which play an important role, which led to the outbreak of the mutiny. And this is so important. We actually look up to them for actually taking our care, but who is taking their care and whether their care is being taken is something that, after listening to all the inputs of these scholars and all the discussions that have taken place since yesterday, what I have understood is that history means different things for different people, right? And whenever and with each occurrence, like sir mentioned, each occurrence has got several dimensions, and the story can be only understood after exploring all these dimensions. Otherwise, it would be incomplete. Uprising of 1946 was against a colonial power at the end of the day, and it was against various shades of discrimination, not just one. The journalists who visited HMIS Talwar have reported that the ratings were not just demanding amenities for themselves, but they were constantly calling out for the independence from British rule. I read in one of these sources that when a rumor had spread that the British were going to starve these ratings to surrender, loads of civilians had gathered in Bombay with milk, fruit, vegetables, whatever was possible. So at one level, the civilians and the servicemen had come together and they had united for a common cause. I just want to conclude by saying that I know that this is a commemoration, but this is a story which deserves to be told. Thank you so much. And that is it. Thank you so much.